Well, hey Lilith, so I want to start off by asking where were you born and raised?
I was born in Buffalo, New York, but I only lived there till I was 5. I mostly grew up in the Atlanta, Georgia area.
Oh, Atlanta, Georgia. How was it growing up out there in Atlanta?
It was all right. I mean, I didn't know anything else except, being a small child in Buffalo. And, you know, you go from snow to, better climate, I guess.
Were you the only child, or did you grow up with any siblings?
Just me.
How was it like being the only child, I guess, for you?
I didn't mind. I mean, I kind of mostly hung out with adults.
So how did you get started in the industry?
Well, when I was in my late 20s, I knew a lot of girls that were strippers, and I just really didn't want to go that route. It just wasn't for me. I didn't like kind of what you have to do, basically. And so I thought of, what else can I do that I could work for myself? And so I, looked into it. I wasn't lead to that, but I learned about it and I became a dominatrix. And you have to run a lot of ads, and, field back then. I don't know how it is right now because the industry's changed so much. I was doing this in the late 90s and early 2000s. And so I would have to, field a lot of phone calls.
So what was it
Find out
about
what they.
stripping that you didn't like about it?
I guess I just felt it was so, anybody could just walk in off the street. People people you don't know. I just felt like if I was going to do something like nudity wise, I felt like, okay, maybe like you could do modeling and do a magazine or something. And then it's not quite to that level, where you're just so exposed. I mean, people could see you, not just like live right there in person. It just felt too impersonal.
So what was it about the dominatrix part that drew you in to do that?
Well, then I could be in control and of what I did and didn't want to. And that's why I did a lot of screening of my phone calls with the people that wanted to come for a session. Because, if they were into that I just wasn't going to do, but I just direct them elsewhere, maybe you want to go see somebody else, even though that was a loss of money for me. I just, felt like if it wasn't for me, it wasn't for me.
Yeah. So did you work for an agency, or you said you just worked for yourself? You did this all on your own?
Right. I did it all on my own. I had to take out ads and, big ad campaigns and magazines and local magazines. You have to do the local stuff and then have to do like the bigger scenes, like, international. So people from all over the planet would call.
How was it when you first started? Were you scared? Were you nervous about maybe running into the wrong guy or the wrong person?
Yeah, I was scared and nervous, but I was lucky at the time. I had lived with a boyfriend and I had him do like security from another room, just so there was somebody there in case something went down wrong. And he'd be like, okay, I gotta come help her out.
The screening process, what was that like?
I would ask them what they had in mind. Because, there's many different fetishes. I mean, some people had, simple things like they just wanted to be controlled in general. I mean, there was so many different fetishes, like boot fetish, smoking fetish, spanking, corporal punishment.
So smoking fetish.
Yeah, like some of them, they want to be like used as an ashtray. Like I don't smoke as a habit, but if somebody had wanted to do a session with that, I didn't mind just doing it for that.
And these are hour-long sessions?
I offered a half hour or an hour.
And all these sessions would take place in your home?
Yes, I had my whole front room was just basically a little dungeon.
What are some of the craziest experiences you've had doing this?
Oh, I had some crazy ones because I also started doing like indie horror movies. I would get a lot of weird requests because, if they knew me from both the fetish world and the horror world, then you'd get people with some weird desires asking for some weird stuff. I got this one guy that was insistent. He really wanted to be crucified. And I was like, I could go to prison for thinking, I mean, the people would be asking for some outrageous stuff.
So he literally wanted you to crucify?
Yeah. And I was like, I can play it up like I do that, but I can't really, nail something into your head. That would be, highly illegal.
Do you have any other like crazy stories or anything that you've dealt with?
Yeah, I mean, there was many crazy things like, misunderstandings with people. And then sometimes you'll get somebody that's just, an insane person. There was a guy that, he was doing all sorts of drugs and showed up and wouldn't leave. And the police had to be called and he wouldn't leave. And they ended up like pepper spraying him and taking him away in handcuffs. And I was like, well, I guess he got in bondage one way or another. It was just, you never knew what was going to happen or who was going to call.
What's the craziest fetish that you had to perform or something that was shocking to you?
Well, there was a lot of shocking ones that I did not perform. But ones that I did, I mean, it's like, to me, those were the ones that weren't super shocking because obviously if they were super shocking, I probably didn't do them like, the one with the crucifixion stuff. But there, people that showed up. Oh, this one guy, he was crazy. He showed up from out of state. He drove several states away and he had put himself in a chastity device. And he got there, and he acted like he had these sessions before and knew what he was getting himself into. And he gives me the key and he starts like getting really scared and wants to leave. And then he was acting up. So I really had to call my boyfriend in from security and for security purposes. And I said, you got to let him out. You got to let him out of this. He was in a stockade. And so the thing was the boyfriend had been taking a shower. So he was only wearing a towel and he lets the guy out, takes his blindfold off and, his towel fell off. So he's standing there naked and this guy's like horrible running out the door pretty much. And he doesn't get his keys back. So I do not know how he got out of that device.
So the fetishes that you did turn down, what are some of those?
Oh, like I really wasn't into doing anything like, the toilet kind of play or the things with animals, nothing like that. Yeah, there was things that people would call up and ask about that were just way too not for me.
Did you have a lot of regulars?
Yeah, there were some regulars and people that would come when they were in town. And then you'd have some regulars that were local too.
The toilet requests, did you get a lot of those?
Oh, God, yes. There's so many people into that. I mean, you really learn things when you go into that industry. If you're not like already into all that stuff, you learn about a lot of things and you find out that there's a lot of people into a lot of stuff that you would be very surprised about.
Have you ever had any politicians or big time people or clients that would show up sometimes or no?
Well, the guy that I was talking about that drove from out of state with the chastity device, he claimed to be a friend of Bill Clinton. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Other than that, like, there were some people that like, so they played in this band or that band. There could have been people that I didn't realize were in certain industries and just didn't know them.
Did you enjoy being a dominatrix?
It was fun and it was profitable, obviously. You could, if you work, an hour, you pretty much are making the amount that you would make, working a full-time job all week. Oh, it was, worthwhile doing.
On average, how much did you make per session? Like, how much did you charge for a half-hour session?
Back then it was way less money than it would be now. It was like $150 for half and then $250 for an hour.
Have you ever dealt with a hilarious situations?
I found it hilarious when the boyfriend's towel fell and that guy thought that something else was going down.
Yeah. I know you said you had a lot of misunderstandings. What were some of those misunderstandings?
Well, one of the people arrested, how about people into that toilet stuff? One of the guys, he decided that that's what he wanted and he wasn't going to leave until he got it. And I said, well, I don't do that. You're going to have to leave because it's not going to happen. And so it was like a big argument about it. And I did have to have my boyfriend come in and do security for that because the guy just was not leaving. And I know that I found out later there was also another one that there was I had like two that were booked back to back in time. These two guys, they saw each other when they left, which is rare because I would usually have a lot of time in between these things. But these two guys saw each other. And later I found out that they worked at the same office.
So I see your name is Lilith Stabs. I know you say you did indie horror films. Is that part of that name or is that part of the dominatrix part of it?
Right. Yeah, I mean, well, I would get, it was part of my image. Yeah, I was very like goth looking back then, and it worked well for both industries, I guess, especially the horror.
So you got into the indie horror films after the Dominatrix, after you entered that
Right.
world. So how did that
Well,
come about?
I was doing
How did you?
for a while. And
So how did you get
I
started with that?
slowly phased out the dominatrix stuff and just did the horror stuff.
Did somebody just approach you one day? Was it a client that kind of got involved in that?
Well, I had at one point had a boyfriend who was way like into comic books and stuff. So I would go to these conventions occasionally. And at one of the conventions, I met a comic book creator, and he was also making his first horror at the time. So it kind of worked out because I was like, oh, cool. I was kind of wanted to be in a comic book. And, you know, the horror movies were something I was thinking about how to get into. So it just kind of worked. I got to do both right off the bat.
How many films have you done?
Somewhere between 20 and 30.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, I mean,
how much do actors and actresses get paid for like that kind of work? Like, how much did you get paid?
Yeah, it was different for every time. Like some people expect you to work for free. Some people, you know, they know that they had to pay you. And then some people would just be like, try to get you to do it for as cheap as they could, but they would cover like your travel and expenses and stuff. So it just always varied. But yeah, those movies are low budget and a lot of people are making them. You could be in like a ton of them if you really tried, you know, in that industry. But I just always did a few a year, you know, and then I kind of got out of doing those for a while. And then, but you can always go back to it. I've started kind of getting more active with it lately.
Do you have any big roles in these films, or were you kind of like, I guess, the person that would get killed and maybe a background?
I mean, I was always doing speaking roles. Yeah, I always had like, you know, one of the stars may have not been the top one. I used to complain a lot. I'd say I used to get second billing a lot. Like I would get to play like one of the supporting roles.
Anybody realize that you was a dominatrix?
Oh yeah, a lot of people knew. It was always something I would get asked about in interviews.
Would you ever get requests from people when you're trying to act out a role in one of these indie horror films? Would they kind of pull you to the side and ask for a special?
Maybe some of the roles I got were kind of like, especially the first couple ones were kind of like, you know, that style more kind of.
Well, I do have a final question that I ask all the guests that comes onto the show. From your perspective, you know, for our listeners, what would you say turns women on romantically and sexually?
I think, well, romantically, being treated well, obviously. I mean, and that's going to vary from woman to woman, what she perceives as being treated well. But, you know, there's the obvious of taking her out, you know, the whole wine and dine and treating well, and not to the extent of the whole love bomb thing, because that can, you know, get a little weird sometimes maybe, but then sexually, that's also going to be but the woman that would obviously, maybe if you want it, obviously do, and don't be expecting it so much, you know, don't be like expecting it to be, and it could happen quicker that way, I think.
You said don't expect it too much?
Right, like some guys, they might be expecting, you know, way early, right? But I think if they don't act like they're expecting it, then it could happen quickly.
Okay. Well, I hope you have a great day. All right. You take care.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.